those that might be staying, coming and going. All right, so what I thought we would do rather than like just a PowerPoint presentation is have a little bit of discussion, because I know a lot of you have been involved in training with needlework, maybe some of you it's newer. So I thought maybe we could just kind of discuss the equipment. Fun with needles is what I entitled it. We could discuss some of the equipment, and maybe I can share with you some of the problems that I've encountered, and you know, if anyone else has encountered any problems in needle training. You know, everybody always benefits from hearing what happened with the other guy and how you work through it. So that's kind of what I was thinking we could do. I do have some slides. Some of them you may have seen before, some of them might be new. But if there's any particular question that might be illustrated better by looking at a video, or if you just want to look at videos and not discuss, we can do that too. So I'm prepared for that. And then I thought I would go ahead and bring several different handouts, including shaping plans for injections and a sub-Q injection, a regular IM injection, a couple of blood draws, and then some record sheets, just FYI. When I do needle work, or the same would probably hold true for what we'll talk about tomorrow. There was some confusion on what tomorrow, or I think it's tomorrow, anyway, the same other little subset, small spaces, is going into a squeeze cage or a crate, or for an animal that's scared of shifting inside. So just an animal who might be fearful of any sort of small space. That's kind of what we're talking about. The next deal like this. All through, girly. Okay. So yeah, so I've got blood draw examples, because with these kinds, or record sheet examples, with these kinds of behaviors, you know, they're really important. You want to be able to repeat them whenever you need. You don't want to just do vaccinations once a year and then have huge regression, but we've got a year to rebuild it because the animal may need an injection between them for some other purpose. So you want these behaviors to be very reliable, and we do know that they cause pain, and no amount of training takes away the pain, so we just want to make sure the animals are comfortable with getting a little bit of pain. And so a lot of times what I like to do is create a record sheet that is only for this behavior, and a lot of times it'll have the shaping plan across the way the record sheet is set up, shaping plan across the top, and then you can score whatever you're working on. It gives you a really nice look at how the behavior is progressing. And then also, just as you're maintaining the behavior, you can kind of see what steps you've done. Oh, we haven't gone back and done a blunt since we did that blood draw. Maybe we need to do a blunt and just touch them and do whatever, working up to the next blood draw. So it gives you a really nice snapshot of that individual behavior. And again, just with these behaviors that have pain or fear associated with them, it's kind of nice, I think, to have a look at just that one behavior. So I have a couple of examples of that. One sheet filled in. I sent 20 copies to some other printer around the zoo, so they now have Maggie's blood draw training. I have a polar bear blood draw. I wasn't sure if it was injection or shaping plan. And then a blank record sheet for, I mean, it could be any bear, I guess, but I made it for a polar bear, a blood draw. So little different, you know, different bits about each of those behaviors, you know, an elephant ear versus a polar bear foot. So anyway, I just pulled those up. You'll notice some of them have different footers on the bottom because they were used for different things. So, but they're just here for your information if you want to have a look at them. I only made 10 copies of each because I was trying to not waste too much paper. So if there's more of you than 10, which there definitely are, if you don't get a copy and you want one, that's easy enough to do. So I'll just go ahead and sort of send those around. And I guess probably maybe we can just kind of start off by being really general with needle behaviors, and I'll just kind of tell you what I've done when I've trained needle behaviors. And so needle behaviors would include blood draw, sub-Q injection, IM injection, catheter insertion, infusion with a catheter. Those are the things that I've personally been involved in training. There's probably, oh, acupuncture, that would be another one. So, you know, those are kind of the things that I have personal experience with. So I guess one question would be, have you trained other needle behaviors that would, you know, or something that falls into this category that maybe I haven't thought of yet? Are there any others? If you think of it later, that's fine. So the equipment is essentially the same. You want your needles, your syringes, if you're withdrawing something or putting something in, you still have to have the syringe. Usually doing an injection, you're going to use a needle on a syringe. Doing a blood draw, you can use a setup like this, or you can use the butterfly. And on the butterfly, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, you're going to have your setup more like this. So you have the needle part that goes into the animal, and then you can... So you have the needle, you know, this is your setup for a blood draw, and you can withdraw like that. For, I think all of these behaviors, because it is a veterinary behavior, and I've said this in different presentations as well, but I think it's really important to make sure that you're doing exactly what the vet staff is expecting, because you don't want to have trained it and think you're all ready for them to come in and do the procedure, and you're like, no, that's not the right spot. So make sure that you're working together. I know a lot of you are working with vet techs to get blood draws or injections. In some facilities, you know, the keepers will do the majority of the blood draws once you're trained and able to do that. So kind of depends on the institution. Certainly have seen it done both ways highly successfully. But getting the vet staff the opportunity to come up, especially I think as there's more and more of this kind of thing being trained, it might be that some of you get trained to do blood draws or injections, or the vet staff may just come up periodically, so you really want to have your training generalized to a number of different people. And I think zebras is a great example. I'm sure there's other examples. I'm just familiar with zebras, so I'll call them out as a yay zebra training. You know, today we had a session and Amber asked me to step in and be a third person. The animal's never had a third person step up to her, and she doesn't know me other than maybe as somebody who stands back and observes for quite some time. And I was able to step right up and participate in the training. And I think in part the reason that that works so well is because they've been using a lot of people as that technician role to kind of stand in and practice the training. So it was a really nice example of building flexibility in from the beginning and having a number of different people be able to step in and do the training. So have talked to the vets, make sure that you've kind of mapped out on the animal and in the facility where you're able to do whatever the behavior is. And then make sure you know all the equipment that they'll need to have on the actual day of the procedure so you can prepare the animal to have all of that. I mean, that probably seems like a kind of no-brainer, but sometimes if you don't really take time to work through it, then you may miss a little something, and who knows, that little something could be important to the animal, like the gauze pad with the elephant, if you saw that video. That's something that you might not think of would be that important. So just kind of the general, I'll just tell you kind of the steps that I typically use, and then maybe we can have some discussion if you've had experiences doing things a different way, or if you've been involved in training and had some problems along the way, kind of where those problems might have occurred. So generally, my first thing I do is get the information and then train the animal, if they're not already trained, to be in the position that you need them. So if it's for a blood draw, find out what's the best vessel for the blood draw, have them fully trained to present that body part to expose, the vessel. And once they're trained to hold that, or trained to present that body part, I usually like to train them to hold it for a bit longer than I think is actually going to take for the blood draw. That way you're kind of training on the safe side. So if you think it's going to take you 30 seconds to do everything you need to do, have them trained to hold for 45. So train the position, train it for longer than you think you'll need it. And then you begin desensitizing them to perhaps a second person. Oh, that's something else I wanted to say is I know there's a couple of different ways of using your 2 people. Most of the time these behaviors do require 2 people. And a lot of times we have the feeder who's delivering the food as the person who might be doing the blood draw is bridging and directing the animal. So that's one way of doing it. And most often I've used the roles of technician, which is the person doing whatever, and the trainer is the person who is generally overseeing the session, directing the movements of the animals, saying, okay, you can step up now to the technician. So the trainer, the trainer has the goods. That's the person with the food. And so they are generally managing the animal's behavior, assessing the comfort level of the animal, and kind of directing everybody else in the area, which is very different to somebody who's just feeding based on what they're being told to do over here. I think that, and I recognize sometimes you don't have 2 qualified people, so maybe you have somebody step in as a feeder, but one of the advantages is that person who's kind of eye-to-eye with the animal as the trainer can really pay attention to the animal's emotional state, make sure they're calm and relaxed, whereas if you're focused on giving an injection or taking a blood draw or something else, you might be more focused on just that. So it kind of allows somebody to have eyes on everything, and also safety, make sure that everybody's staying safe. So when I say trainer, typically I'm talking about the person who's giving the food, directing the animal's movements, blah, 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 all that. Technician is the person who's doing the stuff. That being said, the technician can certainly use a bridge, and if they're trained and skilled with it, so both people can be bridging, but you just want to say, okay, trainer's bridging up until this point, now technician's going to take over bridging. And depending on the animal, depending on how well the trainer can see, the trainer may not be able to see exactly what the technician is doing, so it's helpful to have the technician take over some of the bridging. Probably the big obvious example is if you're taking a blood sample from behind an elephant's ear, there's no way the trainer can see what you're doing behind that ear because you're completely blocked. So communication between the trainer and technician is super important. Okay, I'm going to touch her now, and what that means is if the animal's comfortable being touched, the next touch is a bridge, or the next bridge is for the touching, and that gets kind of a regular piece of food. But then when you say, okay, I'm going to do the needle now, needle, bridge, then now the trainer knows, okay, the needle is a new step, we're going to give a much higher magnitude of reinforcement. So that communication is obviously an essential part of using that approach. Anyway, so trainer, technician. If an animal is sensitive to multiple people, desensitization to multiple people must be a part of it. Same goes with touch. But if you have an animal that's relatively comfortable being touched, you can probably move in pretty quickly to beginning to touch the area. So I like to isolate the area, teach the animal this is the part of your body we're talking about, this is where it's going to happen. And then you want to include touching, holding, if pressure is involved, depending if it's blood draw or an injection, the sensation is going to be a bit different. Now I get to use my visual aids. Gauze pads. Jenny was so sweet, she gave me big ones and little ones. So I don't care, just give me some gauze. And again, depending on maybe the species, how olfactory dependent they are, you may want to think about alcohol versus Nolvasan versus training them just for a wipe with water. In my experience, animals are generally more reactive, if they're going to react, to alcohol than Nolvasan or iodine or something else to clean the area. I think just because of the sensation that it causes, the cooling. So that's just something to discuss. Are there any rules regarding what you need to clean the area with for injections or blood draws here? I know some vets are like, you must do 30 seconds with hot water, and then 30 seconds with alcohol, and then wipe with betadine or something. But,
So far for the zebras, it's just been a quick alcohol wipe.
Okay. And is it alcohol over Nolvasan or over?
Just alcohol.
Just alcohol.
It's been just alcohol, probably like a 2-second wipe to make sure the area is soaked, and that's all we've seen, and that's for the real estate.
Okay, okay, and no rules about like it has to be circular or white, white, white? I'm not kidding, these are, I've had vets go, no, it has to be this way, so that's where, you wanna make sure that you're doing what they want.
Yeah, no, for zebra, it's that, and for the blood draw and the tiger tail, it's the same. And for voluntary injections, there's not alcohol.
Okay, okay, perfect, good to
So
know.
it's pretty lax, I
Yeah.
think, what you're saying compared to that, yeah, it's lax.
Yeah, I mean, there's all spectrums, just with anything, no matter if it's vets or keepers, you're gonna see people that want things done different ways. So anyway, that's fine, we respect whatever they want. And we can trade for it. We just need to know ahead of time. So yeah, so obviously cleaning the area, a lot of times I will just start with a dry gauze and then maybe move to water and then to the alcohol or whatever you might need. So you want to obviously include that. Depending on the species, some people will definitely want to wear gloves. And I noticed there was white ones and blue ones, so don't know if that would make a difference to some animals. If you're working right up where they can see everything, you got a chimp or a primate that's sitting there staring at you, taking blood from their arm, it might make a difference. So you want to consider that if gloves are going to be a part of the procedure, or any other PPE, I guess. And then you're pretty much ready to move on to starting to, if it's blood draw, you're going to have to hold off the vessel so that you can take the blood. But then you're kind of ready to start moving on to the needle stuff. So usually for needle stuff, I'll either start with just a syringe with no needle on it, or you can start, you can start with a needle on the syringe but with the cap on it. And if you look at any of the shaping plans, you'll see it does identify touch, build duration, and then pressure, no duration, build pressure and duration. So those, from a needle behavior, I think those are the two aspects of the behavior, is the pressure and duration. So you want to build those individually and then begin to put them together. And you can do that with the syringe, with no needle or the capped. And again, at that point, then you can start to use a blunt needle. And I usually like to use at least an 18 gauge. I think that's what this one is, yeah. At least an 18 gauge for my blunt, because you still feel the poke, but you're not going to break the skin unless you scratch it. And so I'll clip the tip off, and then I usually take my Leatherman and kind of file it down so it's not super pokey or just on the concrete. So this would be kind of what an 18 gauge blunt feels like. And just for comparison, I blunted a, blunted, I want to pass the wrong one around. Blunted a 25 gauge butterfly, just so you can feel the difference. It's super pokey. Here, I'll just send it out. Super pokey, and I think you can see, like, if you put it on your own skin, you can feel how you might actually break the skin with that little guy. It's a big difference. And I learned this many lessons I've learned the hard way. That's one of them, is I thought, oh, it's better to clip a small needle. No, I poked through a little bit. I was like, crap, I didn't mean to do that. So just something to think about. I mean, if an animal has super tough skin, maybe you'd have to work pretty hard to do it, but you can get through the skin with a little needle like that. So then with the blunt needle, I think you'll find it's a really valuable training tool, and you can essentially train for two sensations. And I think this is more important for an injection versus a blood draw, but the sensations that you can train are the quick, hard jab. And for some animals, like, if they have really hard skin, you have to kind of pop it through their skin, right? So even just this movement of your hand can sometimes frighten an animal. So you can train for that quick movement of your hand. You can also actually train the feeling of, bam, that needle hitting their skin. And then for blood draw, I hope you're more gentle. We were talking about this morning as well with the zebras. With the blood draw, I have seen regression when somebody put the needle in a little too aggressively or hard. And all the feeling is on the surface of the skin, and then inside the vessel, or on the surface of the vessel, they're feeling that as well. So you want to try to slip the needle in gently for a blood draw, in my experience. There's no reason to like jab it in hard.
Have you actually stuck thick-skinned animals like horses and zebras?
Oh yeah.
And have you been able, because in discussing this with the vets, we've discussed it with Monica as well, and like, she's pretty sure that the hard stick would be better. How successful have you been with the harder sticks for the
You
blood
mean
draws?
for blood draws, not
versus-
injections?
For blood draws.
Yeah.
Versus like how much resistance is there really when you're trying to ease in that needle?
I guess, so when I have a thick-skinned animal that I'm doing a blood draw, what I like to try to do is pop it through and then ease it in, kind of. I mean, it's still one, that makes it sound like it's two movements. I think the less movement you have, the better. So you do have, and you feel it pop when you get through it. So you have to you do pop it in to the skin, but not jam it. And depending on how deep the vessel is, like with some elephants doing their back leg, if they've got their back leg, if they're standing on the back leg, you can use a regular butterfly because the vessel pushes out to the surface of the skin. But if they've got their leg lifted, I go straight in with 1.5 inches to the hub. So, I mean, you're in really deep. So I think knowing kind of how, and hopefully they would have an idea, can you go, more like surface this way, or do you have to stick straight in? So I think that kind of can help guide you too, as you use a longer needle if you have to go straight in, so that you don't get up against the hub, because then that's what's really going to hurt. And that's one of my, another, I guess now I'm kind of getting into this, butterfly versus needle on a syringe. I am a big fan of butterflies because you can put it in and then you have like this bit of play. So if the animal moves around a little bit, they're not feeling the needle or the syringe kind of jamming right against their skin, and that's what really hurts. I had a couple of chimpanzees that I was training for blood draws, and they're in the blood sleeve, they're holding really well, but maybe they're kind of just shifting position a little bit. And when we had just the needle on the syringe, they seemed to really feel like they could feel it moving and pushing on their skin, and it hurt. And we switched to a butterfly, worked great. They could have a little bit more freedom of movement. And although it's certainly possible to teach animals to stay perfectly still, to me, if I can give them a little freedom of movement by switching equipment, then that's what I like to do. But it also comes to your comfort level. What are you comfortable pulling a blood sample with? So, I mean, there's things to consider. And, like, again, working with the zebras, we're actually using both. Monica, like, she prefers the needle on the syringe, but with one of the zebras, to give her a little bit more freedom of movement, because she'll kind of shift back and forth a little bit. And if she's shifting back and forth, she's going to feel that needle jamming into her when she shifts. So we're going to use a butterfly with her. So because you put it in, and then you just come back here and start taking your blood, and the animal has the little tube, and it's easier to kind of come and go with them. So I'm a big fan of butterflies.
What's the disadvantage of butterfly?
Monica's explanation of wanting to use the needle and the syringe is that there's just a little bit more fumbling in collecting. And I can't
A little
speak to
what?
experience, but a little bit more fumbling on her end of like connecting the butterfly and the tube. And she said something about how you can't feel the pressure when it's going in because you don't feel the suction. So I have no experience personally with trying to use a butterfly, but Monica feels that it's definitely, we've had several sessions with Moki and me and Monica where we're trying to decide where our happy medium line lies, because Moki's really still. She literally understands to stay perfectly still for most of it. So Monica feels like if she's going to stay perfectly still, this can be done a little bit quicker and simpler with the syringe, the needle on the syringe. But if she's not going to stay perfectly still, as Margaret said, you prefer a butterfly, so.
But that's about the human comfort level, not the equipment.
Yeah.
Are you asking about the equipment? Like what would be? Yeah, and I mean, I guess the only disadvantage is if for some reason the blood's really slow flowing, it could begin to coagulate in the tube, you know, the extension tube. And I mean, I've had other animals that were kind of dangerous and we needed to stay further back from them, so we used like literally an extension set, so the tube was this long. And as long as you get a good stick and the blood's flowing, it's not a problem, but if the blood slows down, then it can begin to coagulate in that tube. And so the time to get from A to B and then into, you know, if you need it to not be coagulated, then into the blood collection, the actual tube, not the syringe, then that could be a problem. So, but I don't really have that problem with just kind of a regular butterfly. So what I like to do is start, once I'm kind of to the point, I've used the blunt, and you don't necessarily have to have trained all the hard jab and all of those things before you can begin moving to needles, to actual sharp needles, but you do want the animal really good on feeling what it's going to feel like before you move to the needles. So this is a little like insulin needle. It's about the tiniest needle. There it is, wee tiny. Makes me cross-eyed to look at it. But this is really good for just slipping, like the very first time you just pop this little guy right under the skin, and most animals don't react. That being said, I was training blood draw on a male elephant, big huge guy, on his back leg. I mean, it was one of these, stuck it in his leg, and you would have thought you were cutting his leg off with a dull knife. I mean, he just started reacting. We're like, seriously, Ty? This is a tiny needle and you're a big, huge elephant. And so we had to do a little bit more training with this tiny needle, and then he was fine and we were able to move on to big needles. But, you know, again, you think, oh, this is nothing, it's not going to hurt you, and they blow raspberries in disapproval. So, but I like to usually start with the little tiny needle, slip it in. If you're training blood draw, you're not going to do your training in the vessel. You know, you still want to go through the process of holding off the vessel, put the needle in next to it for practice, and then, because you don't want to inadvertently introduce something into the bloodstream. So it's just, a lot of vets would prefer that you not practice in the vein, and you're also going to cause scarring on the vessel. Oh, for the actual blood draw, just reminded me because this was sticking. If you are using, well, you will be using a syringe, a lead or B, on the butterfly or directly on the needle. If you are actually doing the draw yourself, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, you know, when you first get a syringe, the plunger part is adhered or suctioned or somehow on, so I usually break the seal before I do the blood draw, just so that it's easy to pull with one hand, so that you can put the needle in and then just pull like that when you need to, because otherwise you're, and then it'll pop. So break that seal first if you're actually doing the real thing. So then you want to progress through different needle sizes. 25, this is a 22, 22, 25, 22, 21. Oh, and this is just another tiny 27 gauge or something like that, little insulin needles. So those will usually be the sizes that I'll progress through, and the same are available in butterflies, although the butterflies seem to usually be odd numbers. So here's a 19, which is big, 23, and there's a 25 butterfly I blunted. So those are the sizes that you can often have as you're working up to the size that you need. My general rule of thumb, because this is a voluntary, the animal can walk away at any time. We know we're not training out pain, we're only training out fear and anxiety associated with the pain. So I like to cause the least amount of pain as possible. Big needles hurt more, there is no denying that. Although some vets, that's recording. Some vets will, you know, say, oh, there's not that much difference, but
There is.
like there's a big difference.
I've tried it on my leg. It hurts.
Yeah. And yeah, chimps, I mean, we've had chimps that were really scared of it and we're like showing, no, see, it doesn't hurt. They want to see what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, it hurts more. A 19 kg needle hurts. It's a big needle. And so my general rule of thumb is find out what the smallest size needle that'll get the job done is and train to that. If you're injecting 60 cc's of a super viscous antibiotic that's going to burn, you might use a big needle because it's going to burn and you need to get it in as quickly as possible. Big needle is going to get something in or out faster, right? But if you're training blood draw or something that doesn't really hurt a lot, if you can use a smaller gauge needle, that might be the animal's more willing to stay longer because it hurts less. So it may take a little bit longer to pull the blood sample, but if you can get what you need with hurting the animal less, then, you know, but it depends on why you're taking the blood sample. And if you need 60 cc's of blood really quickly, you may have to train for a bigger needle. So those are the kinds of questions that you want to find out. I've had a dolphin that would not hold her tail still for a 21 gauge. Went to a 23 gauge, perfect, take all the blood in the world you want. I mean, it's a small difference to us, but it was a big difference to her. For some animals where we were quite desperate to get a blood sample and only needed a few cc's to get some serum for different disease testing, we used a 25 gauge. Takes a long time to get it, but the elephant, this was an elephant, she was willing to stand for a 25 gauge, and it was her first ever blood draw. So we were really desperate to get blood on her. So we used a 25 gauge, got a few cc's, the cells didn't lyse, and we actually then were able to build up to collecting like 6 cc's with a 25 gauge needle, and the sample was perfect. The vet actually, he thought that the cells would lyse coming through a 25 cc syringe, or 25 gauge needle, and he was amazed. He's like, whoa, this was a great blood sample, because we weren't like pulling it hard through the needle. It was a lot of technique. You know, you just gently pull it so the cells aren't getting forced really quickly through that little needle, and it was a great sample. So I think that there is some leeway for needle size, again, depending on what you're doing. So I always like to use the smallest possible to get the job done and hurt them less, and hopefully they'll stand there longer because it doesn't hurt as much. With any of your needle training, the behavior isn't necessary, especially with a blood draw, the behavior isn't over when the needle comes out, because a lot of times you need to hold off, weather dependent, vessel size dependent, you may have to hold off for varying lengths of time. So you do want, and I'm not sure if that's been a part of zebra, maybe we're not to that part yet, is blood draw training, holding, are you putting the gauze back on afterwards?
No, not
So
yet.
you might want to
Yeah.
include that as
Yeah.
part of the training, because
Yeah.
if the blood's still coming out,
Yes.
you want to be able to hold it off, especially if it's a hot day and maybe blood's flowing more freely. It can, yeah, so you want to include that in the training, is holding back off with a dry gauze. I think those are kind of the major points. For the injection, that I think that hard hit is, and your hand movement can be a critical part that might not be exactly the same in a blood draw training. So yeah, so I just kind of want to open it up to everybody else now. I think those are some of the big points, the introductory points, and see if you've had any problems that you've encountered or things that I missed, successes, points of discussion, whatever.
He won't quit giving me his butt. That's all he wants to give me is his butt.
And how does that pertain to the needles? Are you poking a needle in his butt?
Yeah, I can still poke him with the needle, and he's, every time I want to do something, oh, but here's my butt. I'm like, oh no, I want your foot. I don't know, I just wanted to say that. But he doesn't, he sings, he doesn't, you know.
Is this Martin?
Martin, yeah.
Yeah.
So, which is odd because he's been poked with it, but yet he still presents it.
So
Really?
no, it's a great
Good,
example of your desensitization has been effective. You've trained this behavior to good reliability. You know, it reminds me of the chumps. We had these two chumps, Skeeter and, no, not Skeeter, Ajax. I get these two. Anyway, they were so eager. There was two boys that were living together, and they were so eager to do blood sleeve because they got a can of Coke or root beer or something really special for blood draws, and so they're all like fighting to get in the blood sleeve. So we had to train release, come over here, and let the next guy put his arm in the blood sleeve. Because that behavior that before was so scary had become so positive for them. So that tells you you've done a good job of training it. And, you know, I'm sure you see that with other new behaviors that you're training because you've heavily reinforced it in the training process, that they keep trying it. Will this give me the good stuff?
I've got a blood draw, awful training story.
Oh.
It was the first blood draw I ever did with Macaw, and I had a tech, and actually we were training from the wing. So I was the trainer holding the beak and holding the wing open so that the tech could then come in and do what they needed to do in one of the major vessels in the wing, which was actually going really well. We did all the training, we did like a paper clip that we started with, and we jab them in the vein with the paper clip, and like kind of like sharpened that a little bit so it made it a little pointier, started with like the capped and then the blunted TB, and did all the steps, and it was all great, and it was doing super well. But it's also a slightly more dangerous situation because at any point in the session, he could put the wing down, he could pull the beak out of the hand and try to break the tech. So it was a little hard. But we did all the steps, all the things, and had our supervisor come by to like see it before we moved on. He's like, oh yeah, this looks really good. He's like, you know, I think you could stick it. And I'm like, it's my first time. This is a supervisor who I should be able to rely on. So I was like, okay, like let's. So we did the skin next to the vein, not the vein itself. And we decided to try it, and that was too much. And the bird was immediately done, and we never let that tech near him again.
So you hadn't stuck up to that point, you had just been showing them the different needle sizes?
We've been, with the blunted, because we were only using the TB, with the blunted TB, we had been jabbing it in the skin, so the next step was to actually do a stick in the skin, not the vein. And we decided to try that next step the same day with this extra person there, so maybe it was that combination, but it was the next step, but he would not let that tech near him again after that.
So do you think it was, because at some point you have to bite the bullet, right? And go, we're going to put the sharp needle in your skin now, and you expect some regression, but hopefully you can build back up. Do you think it was simply that, not simply, but do you think it was only the needle stick, or do you think it was the combination of you had been doing the blunt, a new person, and the stick? Or do you have any way to tell?
It might have been the combination because it was a person that wasn't usually there, who was seeing everything, and then we had also already done the steps just to show the progress. And then it was that like, well, you know, we can do one more round, and it was that like,
damn, one more time! I hate that bastard.
One more time.
It's awful.
that one more time, and
Yeah.
that was it. It was, yep.
And then the macaw was...
We would not let the tech near him again. Anytime
Could
he walked.
you or other people still do the...
We were
like
able
the
to
steps
mostly,
leading up to it?
I had a short time frame, we were mostly able to get it back again, but I had to switch techs, which means that the whole process had to start over again. And by the time I finally couldn't work on it anymore, we were at the point of being able to get the wing open again and get the alcohol back on there, but it took about twice as long.
So what time frame are we talking about?
8 months.
8 months to recover?
8 months total. From when we started behavior, it broke down, I want to say that was probably 3, and then to try to get the rest of it back again took a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and I guess one other thing that you can do is topical lidocaine. I've had really good success to poopy no success using topical lidocaine. Sea lion, couldn't get blood draw with her, use topical lidocaine. You go up between their back, one place you can go is between the skin on their back flippers and along, kind of along the bone here, and right between the toes really. And I think it must be kind of sensitive skin, it's pretty thin skin. And topical lidocaine was really helpful for her. Another elephant, huge regression, kind of like you're describing, where she wouldn't have anything to do with us. Built it back up, thought we'd try it. My brother's a doctor, and he's actually the one who said, you know, we use lidocaine on kids, and we put it on them and then put a piece of cellophane over their skin and wait like 20 minutes, you know, talk to them, whatever, let them have a lollipop while they're waiting, and then go in and do the stick. And he seemed to think that the cellophane and the 20-minute time frame was important. So we did this on this elephant, put cellophane, put it on, you know, and it was easy to get it to stick to the back of her slick ear. Put the cellophane on her ear, would dawdle, keep her there so she wasn't gonna pull it off, but dawdle around for 20 minutes, and bam, got the blood draw. From then on, she was perfect. So that's like the most successful, and then there's varying degrees of it didn't make a hill of beans difference.
Did you have to use lidocaine every time? Or
No, we
just
worked
that
away
first
from
time?
it. Yeah, it was like that initial thing, what'd you do to me? And then she got over it, yeah. Yeah. And we started working on Lisa Elephant here. Lisa had salmonella many years ago and had catheter in her leg and had to have a lot of blood draws, a lot of invasive intravenous sorts of things. And you can take your needles and put them where the sun don't shine as far as Lisa's concerned. She does not care for needle behaviors. And so we went back and started retraining her from her ear in a completely different location. And I'm not sure, I have to ask Gina, I can't remember if blood was actually, there's no elephant here, so. I can't remember if blood was actually collected, but you know, I've got videos of her first stick where she kind of went like this and then would come back down, but then she experienced a regression, and I'm not sure if time or whatever, it wasn't really built back up. So Gina and I have been talking about trying to build that behavior back up with her and how to do it, because she still cares not for needles and lets you know that in quite a dramatic way. So, but we did use the lidocaine, and you know, who knows if it was just the lidocaine or completely changing context. Seemed to help her a little bit, but not 100%. So that is an option that I forgot about, and I don't think I put in any of the shaping plans.
I know we've talked about it before, but this might be a good place to discuss it too. Is like training any kind of liquid actually going in before like for injections,
For injections,
drugs,
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. So actually, I'm interested to ask you before I give you my opinion. Has anyone done, when you're training for injections, have you done like a saline injection, and did you think it was important?
Sterile saline in a line straw, and I think it mattered.
We have not been able to get permission though for that from the vets. When we asked about that we initially asked for it when we were training the zebras to go into the isolation stall to get what would be potentially their knockdown injection in their limb. And the vet staff generally just felt like it's not worth the risk of putting in a needle to have that. And that because they also felt that because the actual injection would burn, that it wouldn't compensate enough. They basically were like, there's always a medical risk to putting in a needle. It can drive down bacteria. They just didn't want to make that compromise. Have you done it, Danielle? Is that why
They've
you're...
given me permission.
They have?
I
To
can't
do saline
remember.
injections?
Yeah, who I was doing it with. It was the Gibbon or Chim.
Was it IM or sub-Q?
Yeah.
Yeah, my experience for IM injections is I haven't really seen it make much of a difference. And I've had vets express the risk factor as opposed to just doing a dry needle stick without injecting anything. The times where I have used it has been a sub-Q injection. I think I showed y'all that video of the chimp. He was going to be part of a research project where he would have to have a considerable amount of fluid injected sub-Q with some compound that was being tested, and he would have to have it frequently. And so we wanted to start with, I think it was, what was the final amount? It was a considerable amount that had to be injected. And so I used saline then, and I believe it was super helpful for that training. But for regular, like IM for anesthesia, I personally haven't, I've tried it before and I didn't see the benefit. In part because of the burning factor, and then, you know, vets were concerned about introducing bacteria or something.
When did you say you felt like it worked with a sub-Q?
With the sub-Q, and I think for this particular instance, because he was going to have to receive the sub-Q injections like 3 times a week for the study, and it was a considerable volume. not just like an insulin injection.
So it was like actually feeling it fill up.
Oh,
like
yeah, I
the-
mean,
the big boy.
it was something like 20 cc's. It was a considerable amount that he would have to receive. But
Okay.
for insulin injections, the amount is usually so small that I think it can kind of, you know, if it's approved by the vets and you know that's something they're gonna have to get every day or twice a day, depending on their diabetes, I guess, it could be worthwhile to train for that. But usually insulin is such a teeny tiny amount that it's pretty easy.
I have a funny story, and it does involve the needles. When I was working with Andy, the chimp, for injections a while back, and I had the needle. I don't think I had a syringe on, I was just doing the, or maybe it did, I had a blunt or something, and I was just poking her leg. She wrapped the needle, the whole thing, went over to the bench, and then was showing me how, look at it. There, she can give her own injections.
Wait, she showed you?
Yeah,
Like,
she showed me on her leg, because that's where we always do it, on her legs, and she's like, look.
that's probably the best thing she could do with the needle that she took.
Chimps take it to a whole different level. Oh, chimp stories, yeah. So I was training this big, huge chimp guy, Ajax, big muscular guy, for blood draw. And he's perfect, he's great with the needle, stick it in, you know, it's the first blood sample, we're all excited, oh yay, Ajax, you're doing so awesome. The minute he saw the blood coming out of the tube, he freaked out. You know, just got so upset, just terrified of seeing his own blood. So we had to run red food coloring up and down the tube, so that he freaked out about the red food coloring. Blunt needle, lay it on his skin, red food coloring moving in the tube. But that was what had to be done. That was the weirdest blood draw thing that has ever happened. I kind of forgot about it until you just said that
I thought you
chimp
were
thing.
going to say he was going to be fainted.
He was probably near. Suddenly he was a Southern belle having a baby.
I think that's something you don't think of, and chimps are very
It was,
aware.
well, and they're bleeding all the
I
time.
was just gonna say that, like, I haven't seen her bleed.
Yeah, I mean, this big, huge guy, and he just was fainting them, like, so, oh my gosh, my blood. Yeah, it was weird, but the red food coloring, that's the only time I've ever had to do anything like that. It was pretty weird. But it seemed to work, and then we could take his blood sampling. So other common problems?
I have a question. For injections, I mean, blood draws and subcutaneous is one thing, but like for injection, like, you know, you're saying that you don't think the subcutaneous makes a difference to train that, but like, does the needle going in even make a difference? Because I mean, it's gonna burn anyway. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like they're gonna sit there for, especially once those vents go in and it burns. Is it even worth doing that?
Yeah, I think
Steps,
absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
it's worth training on what the needle feels like. Because then at least everything's not a surprise, and you have a chance to get more of the drug in if they're comfortable, reasonably comfortable with the needle stick. And, you know, there are, I mean, I don't know anything about this, I'm certainly not a vet tech, but I've heard vets say, oh, well, we can buffer blah-de-blah. So it's possible that maybe certain drugs can be buffered and then they don't burn as much. And so if, you know, that's something to think about. I mean, when they're darting them, I don't know, I guess it'd be nice to buffer it anyways. But when they're darting them, maybe it's not such a priority, but when you're talking about a voluntary injection, if there's anything you can do to make it more comfortable, to me, it's really worth having a discussion about. So is there a buffering agent? Is there another drug that is just as effective, that doesn't burn as much? Can it be concentrated? You know, I know they can be mixed to all different concentrations. Can it be concentrated differently so that the volume is less and you have a better chance of getting it all in? Does it burn more if it's more concentrated, that you think you can get it in if it's 2 cc's instead of 8? I'm just pulling numbers out of the air. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that any components of it that you can train for, you would want to. regarding the saline injection, I just personally haven't seen that much difference in success training with saline or training without saline for an IM. But that's just my, that's my experience.
I think I was wanting to, because I had yet to actually do an injection.
Yeah.
And speaking of first injections, Ashley Kelly did her first baboon hand injection.
Yay!
Her wonderful
That very smooth.
training.
Said it
Awesome.
went very smooth.
Yes.
Who was that?
Boca.
Yay! Up in the, was it up in the overhead?
No, it was in the crate.
Oh,
Yeah.
Cage.
Yeah.
awesome. Did she freak out and get mad, or was she good with
She
you?
did a jump and then more so the rest of the group got really mad and she just sat there and slowly went to sleep.
Aw, good for her. And were you, oh, I guess actually the
So I only got to the blunt needle and the pressure and duration. I never did the stick.
Mhm.
Also, we're on a time crunch.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you, so have you gone back and done any session, when, was this just the other day?
It was this
Yeah.
morning. Yeah, so she's still recovering.
Okay, so keep us posted on how the training goes, if there, since you didn't get a chance to practice all the way up with the sticks, is she gonna have any regression? And
Well, we
How
had
long
another
did it
one
take?
as well, but she was just crate trained and we had a full starter. But she came back pretty quickly. The MOVA's last exam.
Oh.
She came back pretty quickly. She didn't participate in a couple training sessions, and then she was pretty okay.
And I think that's, you're making me think of some other things. That's a good litmus test, if you will, as to, with regard to how much regression you're seeing. If you, after you've done your first stick or a real injection or whatever it might be, can you call the animal up and put a blunt back on them, or is that too much for them? So that can give you a really good idea of how far back you have to regress, or can you just jump right back into it? Oh, I know, that also reminds me of another thing. I'm not a big fan of making pincushions out of animals because, again, you're not training the pain away, you're only training the fear away. And if you're poking them and breaking the skin all the time, it's always going to hurt and you might just make them mad. So I think it's important that they, if you have the time, that they understand what the needle stick feels like and that you build up to the size needle, because you don't want that to surprise them in addition to, now I'm squirting something in you that hurts. So the fewer surprises, the better. Yeah, so if you can train up to that needle size, it's important that they feel that.
Would you say also, so she did it, I mean, if Mocha remembers everything that happened, then a couple of months down the line, she does a fake poking, actual poking, and then like heavy reward,
Yeah,
and then you just keep going, like, so it won't be like, oh, every time I get poked, I mean,
yeah. Every time there's a syringe, you do not get poked. So you're presenting the leg just for the cap, or presenting the leg just for the blunt. And I think with primates especially, but other animals too will examine your needle, and they know the difference in a blunt. And I guess another thing is I've also had to train with some animals where I had to find out what color the solution is that you're going to be injecting. I think Tilazol is maybe a little light yellowish, so you have to make something in the syringe because they're looking at it and they're like, oh sure, go ahead. I know it's not the real thing. So we had to plan for all that. Oh, and sorry, I do see your hand back up there. The other thing, we were kind of talking about this with, I forget who now. Oh, Cymags. If you have animals that are socially housed, you may want to include separation as part of your training, because they could be trained perfectly for 60 cc's of saline being injected into them, and then you separate them and they're like, oh no, I know this is the real thing, so they don't want to participate. So if it's an animal that's socially housed, you may need to include separation and then go through the whole mock procedure with them separated. Yes.
I think in what you were saying about when they know it's the real thing, we tried doing our hand injection with Molly Tiger, who is, of the 4 Texas girls, the most nervous about the injections and has the most checkered past with it. And we were at the day of what, we're ready. And I was sitting there and I did the thing, she like saw it, she saw the pink stuff in there, or she smelled it, or whatever it was, because we showed her the syringe a million times, and whatever the real day was, she was like, you saw in her face, she was like, and we were like, well, that's a good training step, now she's getting the injection today. But yeah, we don't know if it was that, she saw the liquid or she smelled it, but there was for sure a difference in her reaction when we literally had the drug in front of her.
Yeah, and with the blunt, you can also, have it against their skin and do
Yeah.
that whole bit as well. I don't know if
I've started to practice the timing on
Yeah.
it, because my timing it isn't quite there yet. As
Yeah.
well as
and
like,
you kind of feel
yes,
and how it goes,
Yeah. yeah. But yeah, she definitely recognized that the drug was there. We don't know for sure, but that's what
Yeah.
it really looked like.
Yeah, chimps taught me a lot about that because they're like checking everything out. And everything's right there in front of them, so if you have somebody who can really see everything you're doing and is watching all the steps, they notice those little steps.
I have to do that for numerous because everything is great, and then they get separated for one night, and then
The gigs out.
yeah, and then so I've had to start training just leaving longer and longer duration and pick different ones overnight.
So you'll just isolate somebody overnight and
Yeah,
then go
or-
in and do something in the morning.
Yeah, we even tried maybe if we just isolate them just first thing in the morning, everyone gets fasted the night before, and then as soon as they got separated into the next stall, they wouldn't participate.
Have you been able to do it enough that you feel like you've had the opportunity to see improvement?
No, not yet.
Yeah. It's a tough step, for any of those guys that are just so socially tight with each other.
Kelly and I, when we did the Piffins, we asked to do it on the same day at the same time with two vets. So she had Gladys, I had Nika, and we both were able to inject at the same time, and that way they were not like, what? Because I knew she was flipped out.
Yeah, and then they just kind of go down together. Yep, we've done that with chimps too. That's another great option.
Yeah, that's the hard part with the chimps, when we have to separate, because then they know, and then they see that it's the other needle, but Kelly gets to deal with that. She does great, because they can come back to her.
Yeah. Well, it's 12 o'clock. We're taking a lunch break now, and then we can kind of just wrap up. If there's any last questions, or if y'all want to see videos of anything, we can certainly, or if you want to look over the shaping plans, you'll see some redundancy, but if you have questions about it.
Sometimes it's too difficult, so I
Sunday.
yeah, so I don't know,
But
it's
it's not
kind of
necessarily the site of the,
well, she doesn't, she always has to see it, so when I start, I'm very clear. So where my lean in, this is the behavior with the needles in the sand, so I let her see it. Then I ask her, and sometimes she'll delay, but then she'll move into it. So it's very important that she sees it, and that's always in the picture.
and do you do just some general, here it is, bridge and reinforce, here it is, bridge and reinforce?
Yeah.
Moving around, bridge and
Yeah,
reinforce.
and I've
just
done that
general
with another
distance.
person,
Yeah.
so like it's a volunteer, an intern, or a tech, so that when it's moving, it's fine. Virginia.
What is very relevant is her first and last successful voluntary hand injection was done after 17 training sessions. And she's a very scared hyena. She's scared of everything, not just being touched.
Her first, knockdown, you mean, is after 17?
Voluntary hand injection of anesthesia, yeah. I think is
That's
super relevant.
Very
Yeah,
relevant,
like
and
the most
especially,
relevant.
yeah, very relevant, and also especially for her, because of all the hyenas, anything weird.
Yeah.
She's very reactive to it.
Which we did do, there was a while that I was really focusing on bringing new things in the picture, and here's a cone, here's a weird object, here's a funny thing, this makes noise. And she actually reacted very well to that and started figuring out pretty quickly none of that matters. But then you'll shift around to the other yard and there's like a box in a weird place and she's like, oh my God, I can't handle this. So her initial reaction is often more fear-based than not.
Yeah. You know, I guess, I mean, without having seen it and dug through the records to get more information, it makes me wonder, you know, if she'll typically go on for a period of time and then flip out, are you better to not try one more time?
Right.
I mean, I suffer so badly from the one more time syndrome. But, you know, would it be in her best interest, since she doesn't like this behavior, if you get a good one, you know, you just decide, okay, I'm gonna touch her with the blunt needle today, or I'm gonna scrape the sharp needle on her skin today. And then you just jackpot her and get out of town.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have to do it repeatedly. I mean, I've definitely known some animals are like, you know what, I'll do it 1 or 2 times, but after that, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So then I have to adjust my approach considerably, because I always wanna do 1 more time.
Yeah.
So maybe she's one of those that she's
Yeah.
good for 1 or 2.
She has a very clear limit from what degree.
Yeah, but I mean, if sometimes you see it where you come right in and touch her and she, that, I don't know, it would be interesting to kind of see, kind of look at the percentages. I would, you know, again, I don't know if you do this already, but I would want to take that behavior and put it on its own record sheet where I could really track it and it was easy to look back and kind of see if there's any patterns that maybe would emerge.
Yeah, that makes sense. That would probably help and be able to write, you know, how many finger pokes, how many stick pokes, how many blunted pokes did I give, how many did she stand for, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, with chimps, like some great teachers, we actually had to add in a step that we called a sharp. So between blunt and stick, and the sharp was, you just literally take a sharp needle, because they're looking at it, and just sort of scratch it on the skin, part their fur, because we had quite a few that would start reacting to that after they had been poked, and they're examining your needle to see, am I gonna stay or not? So we added that intermediate step that we just called sharp, which meant you were scratching their skin, touching their skin, using a sharp needle, coming at them fast with a sharp needle, but not breaking the skin. And I don't know if she's looking at it, if she's discriminating that at all, but it sounds like she's kind of random about what
Yeah, I
will
can't totally tell
set it
because,
off.
yeah, she'll look at whatever's in my hand when I start the session and she'll look at it very clearly. And then if she's offended, because it's the best way of describing her reaction, then she'll come back and stare at whatever it is that's in my hand and really make sure she's good. So it's interesting because it's just she's taking in a lot of information when she's looking at what I'm holding. And it's something you assume more from like a chimp who is really taking that in, but she comes back like, I have to see what you did and what that is. But
I wonder if doing something like you do 1 or 2 repetitions and then call her back and let her look at it. So you give her the opportunity beforehand, here's what we have, okay, I'm gonna touch you with it, okay, come back and look at it. And, you know, maybe that way she gets something she wants, which is to examine this thing, this offensive piece of equipment you have. And then maybe she would be more willing to hang with you if she sees she's gonna get to turn and look at it.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. Putting that on cue to come and look at it.
Yeah. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what it's been.
Yeah, it's an interesting
Yes.
situation.
And we've switched stalls, took it out of the chute, did it in a different stall, and switched to a whole other stall. Then I'll ask for lean in when we're on exhibit or stuff like that, and she can perform all that. It's still fine. It's not necessarily a location-based thing.
Yeah.
For as much as we can use space,
Right,
she'll
right.
lean in anywhere and let me touch her.
And did you say, does she get offended when you touch her on other parts of her body? That's okay.
The whole midsection has been really easy. The shoulder is also questionable, but in that one I'm a little more cautious because it's so close to her face,
Right.
so I don't push it. But usually again it'll be, I was offended and then you did it again and I was totally fine.
consistently inconsistent?
Yeah, because that happens too. And for a while, she kind of built in this set of three, so you poke her and she'd have to leave. She'd have to swing out, look at you 3 times before she'd stand for a poke. But that was kind of inadvertently built into her whole system, so it was poke, leave, leave, leave. Okay, good.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Darling Indu. She was an elephant that I used to work with, and we would lean her in, ask for her ear, she'd present her ear, we'd wipe it down, get to the point of holding off the vein, and then she'd spin and try to punch you through the ear hole or whatever access she could have. And it was almost every blood draw. And I'm not a big fan of giving a timeout for a blood draw, but we would walk away, walk back, into ear, present it, take the blood, perfect. It was like she had to say, screw you and your needles, come back in a few. And I mean, it was, I think now she's much better. This was early in her protective contact training, and she had tried to kill people, and she had little aggression issues. But it was almost every time. And we're like, oh my God, Indu, really? Why do we have to do this almost every time? So, but we got the blood pretty much every time. She just had to go through this little thing, and it's like, okay, if that makes you feel in control somehow. So, I don't know, if it's, and if it's, she turns 3 times and then comes back in, are you getting the behavior you need, and maybe she's getting something she needs? Maybe it's not something that you want to, I don't know, maybe you do want to present it because you're giving her some measure of control.
Yeah.
If she feels like she has to step away and look at you 3 times or whatever it is. I guess I would think, yeah, maybe it's not how we would like to see it on paper, but does it consistently work for her?
Yeah.
And then what are the costs and benefits? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Keep you posted.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Jessica, what I'm hearing is she knows the behaviors and she is okay with behaviors most of the time, but she doesn't have full trust and she doesn't have full control because she can be spooked by it at any time. So I feel like exactly what Margaret suggested, but also like anything you can do to, the way you said that you kind of randomize when you touch and when you poke, I would think maybe if you could make it more predictable for her, like for sure, she's gonna get to know that I'm never gonna get poked unless I for sure know I'm gonna get poked.
Well, I think that's why we went to randomizing, because we were not succeeding with the linear steps. And so we switched it to randomizing and introduced verbal so that there was a verbal touch before she would feel anything.
Yeah.
So that way and I don't totally know if it's helped or not. I don't know if I feel confident to say that. But those are kind of the steps why we put those steps in.
Yeah.
For those reasons.
What
Like,
time,
it's
just
not
out of
working.
curiosity, what time span are we talking about?
Oh, God.
A long time?
I took her over, 2 years ago?
Oh, wow.
Probably.
Well, and yeah, and we've gone through like trainer versus trainer because each trainer would hit a wall and not be able to progress, even with like people watching. And some of it was we were assuming a negative history. So the first person who did this, that second person did this, and it was like I will allow you up to this point and not any further.
Well, and the unfortunate part was that when I did take her, I did have a pretty intense breakthrough and broke her of I have to leave, and she was like, oh, if I stay, it's okay. And that worked really well, and we led up to an injection really, really, I would say beautifully, and I did the wrong thing, which was bring vet tech in late, very, very late. And we didn't realize that I was poking her in the wrong spot. So then when I moved 2 inches over her sensitive spot, it was completely gone. So that was just a really unfortunate lesson. And so I think that was probably like 6 to 8 months of training in itself, and then we realized, oh shit.
Oh.
Well, that's what we were eating. And then we had to dark. Because then we tried to speed it really fast, and that didn't work at all, so we stopped. So then we're after.
Oh, God, I feel your pain so much.
Yeah. Haven't given up yet.
Yeah, no, there's gotta be a break. That is interesting, yeah, I mean, keep me posted and I would not love to come watch her do that, but be most interested to
Yeah.
continue problem solving.
Yeah.